Alright, 8th graders, today we're going to talk about squares and square roots. And our first question is, what is a perfect square? A perfect square is simply the square of a whole number. And so what that means is 1 squared would be 1 times 1, which is just 1. 2 squared would be 2 times 2, which is 4. 3 squared would be 3 times 3, which is 9. 4 squared, actually in this case it's negative 4 squared, would be negative 4 times negative 4. And you'll remember that when we have a negative times a negative, times a negative, we end up with a positive. So we end up with positive 16. Anytime we have a square, we have a positive answer. So 5 squared is 5 times 5, which is 25. 6 squared is 6 times 6, which is 36. 7 squared is 7 times 7, which is 49. Negative 8 times negative 8 is 64. 9 times 9 is 81. 10 times 10 is 100. 11 times 11 is 121. And negative 12 times negative 12 would be 144. So one thing to keep in mind is that you're always going to have a positive answer when you have a perfect square. Alright, a square root is just the opposite of squaring a number. So the opposite of squaring a number is finding a square root. Alright, so let's see if we can find a few square roots here. Oh wait, we have to first tell what is a radical sign. A radical sign is simply this sign that signifies that you're supposed to take the square root of a number. So all we have to ask ourselves is, well, okay, we have the square root of 64, so what's the opposite of 64? Or what's the opposite of, what number times itself makes 64? So if we look back up at our perfect squares, we can see that 8 squared was 64. So the square root of 64 then has to be 8. Now, the next one has something different. It has a negative in front of it. That tells me that my answer has to be negative. So if I see this negative right here, I know that I'm going to have a negative in my answer. So the opposite of 120, the square root of 121 is what times itself makes 121? Well, that would be 11. Alright, the next one is the square root of 49. And the square root of 49, what times itself makes 49? The answer to that would be 7. And then, what makes the square root of 225? What multiplies together to make 225? I have given you a sheet of squares and cubes, so you can feel free to look at your sheet, but it's going to be negative 15, and again, we do the negative because we have a negative there, so our answer has to be negative, but 15 times 15 is 225. Alright, moving on to the next little bit here. The negative square root of 16/100. Well, what times itself makes 16 would be 4. And since we know that, our answer will be negative. And 0.16 is literally just going to be 0.4 times 0.4. Square root of 81. 9 times 9 makes 81, so 9 is my answer. And the last one, the square root of 144. 12 times 12 makes 144, so 12 is my answer. Alright, we're going to take a look at the bottom of the page here. How do I use square roots to solve equations? Well, we talked about the fact that a square root is the opposite of squaring something. So t squared, the opposite of t squared, is going to be to take the square root of it. So to get that squared and square root to cancel out, so that I just have t, because remember when we're solving equations, we just want to know what's the answer. I don't want to know what t squared is, I want to know what t is. So all I had to do was take the square root of the left-hand side of the equation, and if I take the square root of the left-hand side, I also have to take the square root of the right-hand side. Now I have an interesting problem here. I have the square root of 4 over 25, and so I just use this as two different parts of the same problem. The square root of 4 would be 2, and the square root of 25 would be 5. So t has to equal 2/5. Let's take a look at y squared. To get rid of the square root, or the squared, we're going to square root it. So I just want to know what y equals. And the square root of 4 is 2 times 2 makes 4. And the square root of 81, 9 times 9 makes 81. So y equals 2/9. K squared, I square root it to get rid of the squared, so that I just have k. And the square root of 196 is 14. So I take the square root of both sides, and I get 14. And the last one, square root of j squared would just leave me with j. And the square root of 0.09. So the square root of 9 is 3. So my answer is 3/10. Alright, if you flip your paper over to the back, you'll see that we have some word problems to do. The first one is the Great Pyramid of Giza has a square base with an area of about 567,009 square feet. Determine the length of each side of its base. So, we've been given an area problem of a square, and we all know that a square, to find the area of that, we just do side times side, which side times side is side squared. Now, that being said, to figure out just one side, we could find the square root, and that would tell us the area of just one side. So, if we have a square base with an area of 567,009 square feet, and we need to determine the length of each side of the base, what we're going to have to do is use our trusty calculator. So you can use any calculator you have at home. Your computer will have a calculator on it that has a square root button, so will your iPod, but you may have to turn it sideways to get that option. So we do the square root 567,009. We type it all in under that nice, neat square root sign, and we get 753. Now we can check our answer, because if we have a square and this side is 753 and this side is 753, to find the area we would just multiply the two sides together. So 753 times 753, and that should give us 567,009, which it does. So the length of each side of the base is 753 feet. The artwork on a square picture in a compact disc case, or a CD case, is approximately 14,161 millimeters squared in area. Find the length of each side of the square. So that is the exact same type of problem. I want you to go ahead and try that one for homework assignment. The next one we're going to go over in class, because there's more I want to explain to you about who would be correct and why. So tomorrow when we get to class, we're going to go over the Diana and Terrell argument. And finally, the formula for the perimeter of a square is, can you think of it? How do you find the outside edges of a square? We just add them all up, right? So side plus side plus side plus side. So 4 times s. Find the perimeter of each square. Well, first of all, on each square that we're looking at, we're going to need to know exactly what each side equals. So I need to know what s equals. Well, if the area is 121, side times side was 121. So if I square root that, each side is going to be 11. And to find the perimeter, I would have 11 here, 11 here, 11 here, and 11 here, for a grand total of 44 inches. So I would also like you to try this problem and this problem for homework. So you have 3 homework problems, 2 area problems where you have to find the perimeter, and this artwork problem where you have to find information about the CD, and we're going to go over this one in class. Have a great night.